our work session on November 9th, and we are going to be talking about special events permits and ordinances updates regarding that. So if I'm assuming ComDev is going to present this, or Mr. Fisher?
We are. I'll start it off and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Ward from our special events here in just a minute. And I know this is an incredibly riveting topic that we're going to talk about this evening, but it is one that we definitely need some input on from you all to try to help us move forward in the right direction. We've got a couple of items that we are bringing back. We talked about it a little bit in our last committee meeting, and so we're bringing a couple of these things forward. One of which is mainly just administrative changes, some things we went back and looked at the ordinance where we have ComDev listed for some of the permitting and some stuff for rec and parks. Well, now that we have the special events division, we just need to make those administrative changes, and we're not going to focus on those or deal with those tonight. The other thing that we're really looking at is a new section that we need to discuss that it's in regards to having a request for events that may be an ongoing process. We've never had that before. We have special events that are kind of a one-off thing that we do on a regular basis that we permit now, but we've gotten a request in the past for an ongoing type event. And so we're looking at trying to do something with some policies and procedures that will help us out there. In the last committee meeting, you had asked staff to go back and get some more research on that, so they've done that. And we're going to go over some of those. Ms. Ward will do that. And then at the end, we do have a recommendation to bring to you all. And during that time, we would really appreciate your input and just have some good discussion on how we can move forward with this new type of event. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ward, and then as we go along, you can see some of the research that we found so far, and then we'll talk about that recommendation and what you guys think when we're done. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Ward.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, everyone. At the last admin committee meeting that we had, you asked us to take a look at other cities and see if A, they had multiple permit types, B, if they restricted the number of events on private property, and more importantly, did they restrict the duration of those events? And then C, you wanted us also to take a look at whether other cities have alcohol restrictions and provisions in place for events. So we looked at a lot of cities, as you can see up on the screen. We looked at our surrounding sister cities, Alpharetta, Atlanta, Decatur, Johns Creek, Lawrenceville, Wilburn, Milton, and Sandy Springs. And we chose these cities because they're comparable in our size and also the volume and number of events that they do. And then we went a little bit further and we decided to look at some Southeast cities. These were comparisons that had been used before from other departments at City Hall. And then some of these cities have actually been visited by staff and toured by city leadership. So we thought this would be a great opportunity for us to look at all of these cities. Before we move on and look at everything that we collected, there are really two overarching conclusions that you'll see on these spreadsheets. First of all, you'll see that there really are no two cities that are set up for special events in the same manner. There are some that stand alone like we do. There are some that sit within ComDev, Recreation and Parks, Finance. They work for economic development. And then the other thing that you'll see is that we did not find any city that was challenged with how to handle a business or organization that was wishing to hold an ongoing event on private property. As a matter of fact, as we spoke to these cities, many of them said, when you find out information on this, please come back and share it with us, because they haven't been tasked with that yet, but they were very curious as to what we were going to do. First, we looked at cities with without multiple permit types, pardon me. Those were Alpharetta, Lawrenceville, Milton, and Roswell. And if you look quickly, I won't go through each one. They're all similar in that it's pretty basic. It's required, a permit is required for any activity that's going to affect your ordinary use of public streets, right-of-ways, interrupt the flow of traffic, or would include alcohol service or sales. That's not normally permitted. And those are all pretty standard of those four cities. Then we looked at cities with multiple permit types. It's Atlanta, Decatur, Johns Creek, Little Bern, and Sandy Springs. And if you look at this, for example, they break them up in interesting ways. Decatur, for example, is one of those cities that I was talking about that actually split up their departments. So Decatur has two types of special event departments. One strictly does races and permits, and the other department of special events runs all of their festivals and larger scale events. So they naturally have two different permits running because it's out of two separate departments. They also have one for rentals, very similar that like we have in our recreation department. Little Bern has classes A through E, and those are all based upon size of the event in quantity, because the larger the event, obviously the more staffing it requires. The same with Sandy Springs. They're in a two-tier based on attendance size. The problem that I see with something like that is oftentimes if it's a brand new event and someone's coming for the first time, they may say to you, oh, we're only going to have 200 people at this event, when in fact 5,000 show up. So I don't know how, when someone puts a permit in first steps, that's always the best way. I think probably the best way is to put a permit in and then meet with them and say, how many people, what are you doing on social media? Have you done this in other areas? Kind of dig a little deeper than just having a tiered permit. We looked at the southeastern cities with multiple permits. Brevard, for example, if you drill down, they have one for each location. For example, city-sponsored, private property, public property, alleys, road closures. So they're really specific. They're not talking about the event, they're talking about the location more. Franklin, they basically have events with or without alcohol, and they require a beer permit. And then Greenville, same type of thing. They have one for big festivals and events, and then one for road races, parades, anything that would affect the normal daily activity on the road. And then they do have a private property, and that's for events that would happen to be large. For example, if someone was going to have a 4th of July celebration on their private property at a church, this would kind of speak to that type of event. You had also asked the question at the admin committee, do other cities limit the number of events on a property? And also, do they limit the number of consecutive days? So these are our Roswell and surrounding cities. As you can see, most cities have 2 all the way up to 6. Some cities don't limit events at all. Decatur doesn't limit the number of events on a property. Lawrenceville does not. We do not in Sandy Springs. And then the second half of that question was the consecutive days. Most cities do limit how many days it can be consecutively. We do 3. You have everything from 2 up to 14, and then some more specific, not to exceed 14 days per year for the single event on the same property. Some ask you to go away for a month and then come back. So it's a little more specific. And as you can see, the number of events from our southeastern cities, they do not limit anything. They don't limit the number of events per year or the consecutive days per year. Moving on to our alcohol restriction provision that you had asked about. Each city obviously has provisions and restrictions. They all require some type of alcohol permit. Some require city and state permits. Some restrict where the alcohol can be served. Some require you to go before a review board. So for example, Greenville, South Carolina requires you to get a state license. So you get a permit from the South Carolina Department of Revenue. Johns Creek restricts where you can have alcohol. They only allow it at their amphitheater and their summer hour house at Autry Mill. Little Bern is what I was speaking to about a review board. You have to bring it up to a review board. The next screen, the next page will show you. Ours is very large, so I didn't want to try to put that all in there. We can certainly go back to this and look at it. It's pretty basic. It talks about if you're an organization that has a business license and an alcohol license, you can certainly come and get a alcohol catering. If you do not, you need to go basically find somebody that can go and pull your catering permit. And then at the bottom, we speak to the fact about the nonprofits and how many times we limit them per year. 3 consecutive days, and then for nonprofits, they cannot have more than 2 events per two events may be issued to an organization in 1 calendar year.
So that would be our only limitation right now is for these type of events with the alcohol catering is you can do it for 3 days consecutively and then you have to stop, but then you can start back. We don't really get into how that happens. So that's kind of the only limitation, which is sort of kind of open-ended. It doesn't give us a lot of direction.
And it doesn't really necessarily speak to private properties as well. So our recommendation would be that we would add to our current application and permit for businesses or organizations that are wishing to hold an ongoing event on private property, either that requires an alcoholic beverage catering license, or that would affect the ordinary use of parks or public streets, road closures. This portion talks specifically to events that would not be asking for alcohol. So if you were going to have a concert and you said every weekend on your private property, and you were saying, well, we're not serving alcohol, this would still speak to the fact that you would still need a special event permit because you will be disrupting the ordinary traffic flow around that area. What we recommend is that we already have a current system called Apply For. It is a really great system that we use right now. As a matter of fact, when person puts an application in, an email is generated to all my liaisons in police, fire, transportation. It produces a PDF that gives an overview and then a link, and our liaisons can click on that link and they're brought directly to the application, and they can drill down through the application, either call the applicant themselves or work through me, and I can call the applicant to get more information. So we would use that process, but what we're recommending is that we add community development, have a liaison in community development, add them on to speak to things like zoning for the property, etc. What also we recommend is when you click on our application, there's going to be a new interface. There'll be a section that says what type of event is it. We will put in there private property ongoing event. When you click on that, it'll be a drop down that will give you several other questions that we can fix to whatever we want to ask. It can be anything from what is this property zoned for, and we can give them a list of, CX and X. Okay. And then will alcohol be served? If alcohol will be served, are you the catering person? If not, so there's a whole series. The good thing about Apply For is they are all over the country, the United States, they're also in the UK, so they have a wide, broad range of other events out there. They may very well have things that speak to just what we're looking for, and they can help us develop what kind of questions might work, and then we can kind of scale them onto what we want for Roswell. After staff reviews, we recommend that the final decision would go to mayor and council for approval, and then there would be a part in their application that we would be able to take a look at it and review it monthly for compliance. So if we have code problems, noise issues, we would still have the ability to say that you're not following, you're not compliant, and we could pull the permit. And then the very last thing was just a little other question that you had asked. We recommend not to limit the number of events with alcohol for the nonprofit organizations moving forward. That is a lot of information. I understand, and I'm happy to go back to any slides that you might want or questions, but as Michael said, we're really looking for your all input in what you feel should be our next steps moving forward.
I've got a question. Okay, so zoning, how does that play into it? So I am in a residential area. Can I have a special event permit with an alcohol or a food truck on my private property?
Well, that's what this will speak to basically, is that we will look at it on an individual basis. Once it goes through and we see that they're, for example, it'll go to, let's say Jackie's my liaison, it'll go to her, she will look at all the codes and zoning regulations. If that passes, if we can say that it's safe and we're not disrupting too much of the flow of traffic, it would eventually go to you for your final, mayor and council for your final approval.
So currently, well, excuse me.
You could also do.
Secondarily, I believe personally that there are some zoning areas that are not appropriate for special events. And I would venture to say residential is one of those. But having gone there, why would that be up for discussion or discretionary review? Shouldn't there be certain zoning areas that cannot have special events. But it doesn't seem as though we're addressing that.
Currently in the city code, because special events is not in the zoning or the UDC, it's in the city code. And I believe that mostly right now it's for commercial and the historic district. And I believe we talked about adding residential or looking at the residential, because I don't think at the moment that's currently in the code for that area. I could double check with David, but I believe when we first started talking about all this, we were wondering, should we go into the residential or not, because people have private parties, and we don't want to get into somebody having a birthday party on their own property, because that's different than what you're looking at. Because if somebody's going to have a special event 3 days in a row every weekend, now that's different. So
absolutely, and a birthday party is different than a special event, and I certainly hope that we do not birthday parties. However, special events are another story. So what you're saying is it's going to be discretionary. You choose if my residential property is appropriate for this, but Matt Tizer's isn't. And what I'm asking is why haven't we deleted absolutely inappropriate zoning areas where this could be allowed?
I mean, there's no reason we certainly can.
We haven't really looked at all that.
I think it never came up until the current situation came along.
So, because currently we don't actually have that in there, and then when we started talking about it, we were looking at, when we went to you guys at committee, we had all the zoning classifications to be able to address them. But this time around, we took all of that out at the moment. And that's why I think one of the reasons why they'd be adding ComDev to the application, so that we can take a look and see what it's zoned and whether or not it would work or not. But I guess that's one of the things in the ordinance. Do we want them in the residential areas, or do we say no?
Just exclude it altogether.
Exclude it altogether.
And one final question. I realize HOAs are having food trucks and beer trucks and alcohol trucks, and I understand that. And those are generally held on streets and cul-de-sacs, whatever. But where I'm going with this is, if it's discretionary, how are you going to decide where it's appropriate, where it's not appropriate? Is it appropriate on a city street? Is it not appropriate on private property? Because private property is different than a public street. So I'm asking, I'm trying to clarify this, and Councilmember Palermo has had his hand up in front of the camera for about 5 minutes now. So as soon as you answer that one, I'll call on him.
I think we're going to need to look at that and make work through it to see what zoning classifications we should remove from the city code. And to, if we're going to say no to residential, then if we're going to say no to residential, it should be all the residential. It shouldn't be we're going to choose one and not the other. We should just say no to residential at all
Altogether.
Well, and my point is, it's one thing to say no to residential, but it's another thing to say yes to public streets in residential areas. And the last time I checked, I don't think public streets are zoned residential, are they?
We don't zone streets.
Right. So I think that could be taken care of. Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I'm able to rest my elbow on the desk, so I had plenty of time in me. I appreciate it. I really want to thank staff for kind of really just all the information you're bringing here. I know it's a tough task to really just show a lot of information and then request some direction and policy decisions from council. So I appreciate the time. What I want to address is, about a year or two ago, I had brought to a committee meeting. I wanted to see, and I felt a lot of the community wanted to see more special events, the opportunity to have special events as a destination for the city of Roswell. And we put together an events committee and tasked staff with coming back to us with how can we make it easier for special events to occur, and including how do we make it easier for businesses in the private sector to be able to create destinations within Roswell. And I don't think there ended up being any recommendations coming to council for us to change any laws and make anything easier. What I see tonight is it seems to me that we're looking to just add a lot of legislation, a lot of restrictions. And I guess my concern is it doesn't seem to me like we're addressing a real issue. So for example, I think a great example is a lot of neighborhoods, whether in a cul-de-sac or on private HOA property, have had food trucks or ice cream trucks, different things like that for end of the school year, maybe related to Halloween, etc. So we've seen that. What I don't think we've seen is a lot of complaints or issues with on residential property. So I guess I'm hesitant to be working really hard to create up a lot of barriers to special events. And if anything, what I'd be looking for staff for any recommendations is really two things. One, either how do we make it easier for special events and destinations in the city of Roswell, or number two, how do we make them safer? Because with the COVID era, I definitely do have concerns with overcrowding, et cetera. So are there rules that we should be applying with a special events permit that ensure that they are being socially distancing and not having spreader events, et cetera? Those are the two type of directions I'd love to see discussed. But everything I'm hearing seems to me like it's definitely making it much tougher to have a special event when, again, I feel like we haven't seen an issue. I feel like we have not been hearing from hundreds of residents saying, there's too many special events or there's too many special events within residential. I have been hearing from many that want to see more. Obviously, we know with the COVID situation, certainly I feel most people absolutely do not want to see anything where people aren't socially distancing. So there's that aspect which I'm sensitive to and would definitely support any staff guidance on that. But again, as long as they're being safe and it's a safe environment, I want to see how can we make it easier for people to have the option to be at a special event outside instead for the individuals that do decide they're going to go out, but their only option ends up to be, inside somewhere. So those are kind of my thoughts on it.
Councilmember Judy.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question. I think clarifying all this is really good in talking through what we want and what we want than more than what we don't want. But I had a question in regards to what you just proposed from staff. I spoke to a school earlier this week, a private school that was talking about a farmer's market on the weekends during certain periods of time during the year that the kids could run, learn about money and transactions and stuff like that. I don't know if it would interrupt traffic. I think that, obviously my goal and to most everything we do here is to take the guessing game out of it so people know what they can do and what they can't do. And so for me, answering a question like that and make it very clear where it takes a lot of the politics out of coming to City Hall in front of council and who's this and who's that is very important to me. So if you could address what that would, like a private school holding a farmer's market on the weekends or a Christmas market that goes the month of December, I'd like to, understand what that would be under staff's recommendation.
Well, I think that's similar to a school having a carnival or a fun run. It's on their school property. They certainly, we would have to look at the traffic, obviously. If there were, hundreds of people coming in, I doubt that. But with a farmer's market, you get an even flow of people coming in, buying their stuff and then leaving. So that's on their property, that's school property. I feel, or staff feels, that would probably be something that could be easily worked through without the whole permitting process. We certainly like to know about these events sometimes. Oftentimes they'll call and say, do I need a permit? And we talk through the whole situation. And that's part of the whole relationship building. So we're always open to discussing that and talking about whether it does affect the flow of traffic or anything like that. So that's probably on an individual, like Mayor Henry said, it's almost like an individual basis, some of these, unfortunately.
Generally, those don't need a permit though. If it's pretty much contained on their property, it's not affecting anything on the outside, they don't need a permit to do those kind of activities, and they still won't.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for putting together a presentation and doing all the research with other cities. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the residential zoning, and I definitely understand concerns about having special events frequently in a neighborhood and allowing someone, like, for instance, if I were to bring in a food truck and have a special event, a party, and sell things at my home on a regular basis. I don't think that's something we would want to see. But I do know there are certain situations where folks who have unique homes or properties have offered up their homes for fundraisers or for private special events. So just would like to talk a little bit about how we might continue to permit those, but do they currently require permits now, or how should we consider those? I mean, even something like a tour of homes, how would that be affected with this new policies?
We don't currently request or require permits for that. However, we have to, because we don't really know about some of these things unless we're on social media or somebody kind of says, oh, there's something going on, or there's this big party being planned, or we see it promoted on social media. But there's really no way for us to know some of these private parties or fundraisers that go on. So we don't require a permit now. Obviously, if it's a large crowd, it's a one and done. The police would be called if it was a traffic or music or noise. But no, currently there is nothing in place to even kind of follow up on some of these events that are happening in people's homes.
And there still wouldn't be. So I didn't make the recommendation. I think it's still confusing. And Councilor Planwell, I can go back and address a little bit too about what you are asking, because I can see where the confusion. We're not talking about a regular special event here. A special event that we have today isn't going to change. That's a one-time thing, maybe once every now and then kind of thing. They come in, they get a permit, they do a special event. We've made that very, very easy. With the Apply For system, it's almost all online. They come in, do a pre-event meeting after our departments have looked at it. We get everything organized and they have their successful event and it goes really well. What this recommendation is for, what we're talking about adding to our process, is if somebody wants to do something on a regular, continuing basis. I want to go out and I want to set up an event, not a special event. I want to set up an event and I want to run it for the next 6 weeks leading up to Christmas. And I'm going to have people coming to my event, and it's not in a residential area. It's on a friend of mine's business somewhere, and he's got a vacant lot, and I want to run that for the next 6 weeks. But I may be impacting other people. So what we're suggesting is, what we're recommending is they come in, they do an application for an event, not a special event, and they're holding an event. In that event, we get all the information up, then we bring it to a mayor and council meeting and say, is this an appropriate event, an approved event or not? It's not going to be very many. It's going to be these one-off events that we're trying to figure out how we want to define what that event is and how that decision will be made. And I know there's other ways, Mayor, you had mentioned that we can look at, if we want to do specific, each zoning type, we can go back and do that, and we can look at it that way. But Councilor Palema, the special events, or Councilor Wilsey, the special events don't change. It's running really well right now. And if it's a private event that's not impacting the roads and traffic and safety, they don't even need a permit from us. And we just tell them, no, go and have your event. If it does need a permit, we've got a really good process in place that works for them to have it. And we can have the police there. We can have transportation there. That's why we do a permit, but those won't change. So everything we're doing on a special event doesn't change. It's this new thing that we're getting, this request of, I want to do something for the next 5 weekends. I want to do something for the next 4 weeks. That can have a much larger impact. And I don't know that we need to be making that decision, or if you would need to make the decision. I think it's very difficult to narrow it down through zone. I think it's very difficult to write it out what we're going to allow and not allow. At some point, I believe somebody's got to make a decision, either staff or you all. So for those one-off larger ongoing events, our recommendation is we put everything together into a package, let you look at it and you make the decision. That's kind of where we're at right now. Whether we want to do that or not is that's why we're having the discussion.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you very much for doing all the research and bringing this forward. Just a couple of comments and a couple of questions. We have an event, and I know it's different, public versus private property, but Alive in Roswell, Alive at the former Alive After 5, that's an ongoing event. And I'm just wondering if we could, maybe model whatever that permit is instead of recreating the wheel. And then also, Councilmember Judy had brought up the yurts. Would that be considered an event? I know that was tabled for later discussion, but could, would that? And then also on the residential zoning, we have estate properties, estate zoning, and on a lot of acreage. And what if somebody wanted to do an ongoing event on one of those properties? So those are my thoughts. I just, as far as residential, I know that there's more dense residential and less dense, but some of these more rural properties have a lot of acreage. How are they going to be treated?
Yeah, if there's no impact to the surrounding, if there's no impact to transportation, there's no impact to safety, we're not putting a number or a size on the event. So an estate area certainly can have more people and handle more people, just like Councilmember Wilson was talking about, maybe some homes that might be having an open house type thing. If it can be handled without impacting others, that's fine. But if we're talking about the yurts, I would tell you that as staff, unless you all tell us directly, that's bigger than us. I don't know that you want us making a decision on whether or not restaurants can take up space on public streets for a long period of time and put a yurt in. I would think that would be a policy that you all would want to talk about. And Alive in Roswell isn't permitted. That's a city type event, so it has no permit on it. We have that one down to the number of people, the number of security, transportation, but that's actually a city event, so there is no permit on that at all. And we could run it through our system now, but we just don't. So the special events are already modeled that way. The new ongoing events that we're talking about, if we get requests for those, they would be modeled that same way because we can run those through the same system. It's just different on where what people would get the information and who would review the application. But then ultimately the decision, the package would come to you all for those times when a big event like that would come in.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So a couple of things, observation and then a question. The observation, if you think about in terms of zoning, like civic, park, recreational, I don't know if HOA common areas are in any of those two, commercial, agriculture, rural. I mean, if you think in terms of those zoning, I don't think that special events in there will bring any big problem to the city. So I think defining what kind of zoning can have a special events, I think that will help a lot staff to approve or no approve applications for special events.
Mr. Zapata, can I make a comment before you move forward just for clarity?
Yes, sure.
when we're talking about special events, we kind of already got those figured out. Those work really well for us now. I think we're talking more about these ongoing events. I agree with you that if we wanted to look at zoning for the ongoing events, we should probably do that. And I don't know if maybe that's what you're speaking on, or if you're really talking about all events. The special events kind of work for the zoning now, right? Yeah, I don't know that we need to change those. I think it's more for those ongoing events. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to mention that. I think these bigger ongoing events is more what we're considering.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification. And I think that those zoning that I just talked could be for both of them, ongoing events and special events.
Okay.
So, defining a logical approach of zonings that they can hold special events or ongoing events, I think that will be a big help for staff to approve or not approve.
Okay.
And then in terms of my question here, I read here on the City of Roswell Code of Ordinance, section 3.7.9, section D, no more than 2 permits may be issued to an organization in any one calendar year. So my question here is, what is the logic behind no more than 2 permits per calendar year?
That was our recommendation to begin with, to try to limit the number of times. Is that for nonprofit?
This is that you're speaking about the nonprofit.
That's a nonprofit.
Our recommendation moving forward is not to limit the number of events with alcohol for nonprofits.
I don't know what the logic is behind that. I think that's been on the books for a while. I don't know what the logic was. So part of our recommendation is that we don't limit just a nonprofit just because it has alcohol anyway. So I don't know what that logic is either.
Okay, so we may want to review this no more than 2 permits for nonprofit civic organizations and see if there's any logic or anything that makes sense. We do want
to review that. We're recommending that we don't limit that. Yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I have a question and then a comment. So my question, Mr. Fisher, and thank you for all your clarifications. Those have been extremely helpful. So my question is, then is the recommendation to limit it for a for-profit?
No, there's no limit. There's no limit.
Not at this point, particularly after we saw what most of the other cities do in the southeast in the area. There's not that much of a reason to limit anymore.
We don't limit. Right, that's not.
Thank you. And then, because really it comes back to, again, my goal is wanting to create destinations. I want it to be done in a safe manner, and I think that is very relevant, and we certainly have the authority to do so for a special event permit. But if done in a safe manner, really making it easier. And some examples being brought up were potentially a Christmas market or a fall festival. Perhaps they want to have some warm wine, whatever it might be. I feel like we should be. It's a good use of an empty lot versus a blighted area. I think we just want to make sure to create options and outdoor options for our residents. And so really, what it comes down to for me is I want to hear what are the exact actual issues that we've had by having things done the way we've done, because I feel like there's a lot of hypotheticals, but we're a city with a very rich history. We've been a city for a long time, and so where are the real issues? The only thing that I can even think of that the staff might be referring to, and let me know if I'm missing any other examples. The only issue or the only item I can think of is the From the Earth Beer Garden on the Chattahoochee River. So that's the only one that I can think of that actually had an ongoing, and that's a fair discussion. This council can decide that they don't want to allow anything like that. I disagree with that, but everybody has the right to their own choice. But other than that, I can't even think of where this is relevant. In which case, are we adding more restrictions when those restrictions aren't actually helpful for our end goals? So that's something I'd love to discuss.
Sure. You're absolutely right. From my opinion, the From the Earth Brew is one of the reasons that brought us here. But you're also absolutely right. It's very hypothetical. Because I think our businesses are getting creative, and we might see more of that. part of the problem that we had with zoning is what From the Earth Brewery was doing, and this was an error at the beginning, was that land is actually zoned right now conservation. And in our ordinance, it actually does not allow events on conservation. So we're trying to figure out how to allow. We did the permit anyway, but I don't know, the way our ordinance is, I couldn't do that again today, right now. So I think we're trying to figure out how to do it through a different process to be able to allow that. But I think there is a lot of hypotheticals. So it's not been a big issue. That one had some complaints from across the street from some of the noise. And obviously we are complaint driven, or try to be. If there's no complaints, we try not to mess with things from a code enforcement or a PD side. But we're just trying to kind of cut that off before it comes up again. We want to be sure that we're clear on how we want to handle that, which is why we wanted to have this discussion. But it's not been a big issue, and that probably is a great use of a lot of property.
I think also to Michael's point that there hasn't been any issues with our either 3-day events or like our festivals, our art festivals, or we haven't seen anything, even our Alive in Roswell's. I think this was perpetuated by this issue that came up, and we needed to look at that because we are in a pandemic and people are being creative, and we want to make sure that we're a little bit ahead of this so that we're not saying, oh, I don't know, well, let's see, we would like to be more proactive than reactive in this situation.
Well, and let me just point out too, this the beer garden was not the first example. Actually, the first example was the barbecue place on Canton Street.
That's right.
That had a perpetual, 52 weeks out of the year, the perpetual special event on a neighboring piece of property to serve food and alcohol. So to me, that is not the intention of a special event permit. A special event permit should be a special event, not a daily ongoing business endeavor.
Right.
So,
right. And I think that's what we want to try to figure out, how to handle those ongoing things is what we're here for. But zoning it's certainly a good approach that we could take.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So again, I mean, if we can define the zonings that make sense, like civic, park, recreational, conservation, commercial, agriculture, or any other zoning that might make sense to add, then you resolve the problem. Because as long as you have these zonings, you can do special events and ongoing events. And then ongoing events, you can regulate them. Like if they have a tent, you cannot keep the tent the whole week. If the event is from Saturday and Sunday only, then tents have to come down Monday to Friday. So I don't see that it's too complicated. If you take zonings as the starting point to allow special or ongoing events. Plus, on ongoing events, I understand there have to be some extra regulation because, you don't want to have a tent, year-round there where it doesn't belong, this infrastructure. So as long as you can regulate how the infrastructure will be put in place and take away before and after the ongoing events, I think that make it clear for everybody and clarify stuff to approve or not approve events. So I think the starting point is defining the zonings. That is what my logical approach would be.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious in looking at, we do have a number of event facilities in the city. So I'm just curious what zoning areas they are permitted in and how those permits are prepared or permitted.
So our special event facilities are mainly in commercial.
Right.
We have some in the historic district area.
Right.
We do not have any event facilities in residentially zoned properties. Some, depending on where they are, some of them are conditional use, others are allowed by right, depending on the zoning. But mostly it is commercial and the historic district area.
Okay.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I still come back to, it seems to me like we're trying to find a solution when there's not a real problem. Because now, again, if we look at two real items that this would address and this would potentially restrict are the outdoor area at 9 and the outdoor area of the conservation land on at the river for the From the Earth beer tent, beer garden, whatever it was called. And with that, the beer garden, to staff's point, offered a lot of creativity, offered a safe way to be outside and to support a business. I am opposed to noise issues or anything like that. That's something that can be addressed without not giving the opportunity for special permits, special events. And then same thing with 9. I did learn from the mayor and from staff that it turned out that neighboring property was it was an ongoing special event. I don't see that as an issue. If one of the places wanted to use, the parking lot at the antique place for just an ongoing Christmas market, anything outside, just really a fall festival ongoing, whatever it might be, I don't see that as a downside. I see that as creating destinations and giving people the opportunity to be outside and socially distance. With 9, it was clearly successful and helpful to have that out there because their food was not very good or popular. It was always packed out there because it created a great destination scene. So right. I think we should be looking at how do we make that easier and not how do we add restrictions to eliminate that.
Well, and I have a counter argument to that, which is if I'm purchasing a piece of property in Roswell and I'm doing my due diligence, I'm going to look at zoning in neighboring properties, and what I'm looking for are the possible uses. So, for example, when I purchased my property, I knew that I was adjacent to a cemetery. Now, never in a million years would I think that there could be an ongoing special event in a cemetery. So while I did my due diligence, while I looked at zoning, while I looked at everything that I thought I could anticipate by purchasing a home or a piece of property in any given area of the city, you can't predict this. And my issue is, I ask every person, whether it's a business owner or a resident, to do their due diligence and know what to expect when they purchase a piece of property. But if we do not tie this to zoning whatsoever, then you are just throwing that out the window and saying, well, you know what, you might have purchased property next to a cemetery, but it's not limited to a cemetery. We can have 52 weeks of the year on ongoing special events. So that is my issue. It's the expectation of a property owner purchasing, whether it's residential or commercial, on what is going to be done around them. Additional comments, questions from council? Mr. Fisher, what kind of guidance do you need going forward?
I think we've got the guidance if we wanted to go back and look at it from a zoning standpoint, keeping in mind that we want to bring as many events that make sense in and make it as easy as we can. But I agree there could be some zoning that is just not appropriate for it. So I think we can go back and just look at the different zoning types and bring that back to committee for discussion. The only thing that I'm not sure how we're going to deal with, and it was something the council members of PATA had brought to my attention, is if somebody wanted to do, for instance, a summertime craft festival, and just for an example, we take that spot down there at the river, and we want to do a craft festival. If they wanted to put a big tent up there as part of the event for 6 weeks in a row, is that okay? Because I know Mr. Zapata was talking, Councilmember Zapata was talking about, we could do it during the event, but then take it down, when it's not an event. Is it okay, do you think, if the event has a beginning and an ending, if the infrastructure stayed up from the beginning until the ending. If it is, then I think our challenge is going to be just going back and looking over the zoning and making sure we're making sense on what zoning would be good and what would not. I see some head shake. That's like as long as we have a good start and stop point, we're good with that. Okay, I think we got what we need for now. We can come back to our committee. We have a little bit of time, so we can bring it back to the admin committee to try to put this information together.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. We are adjourned.